In the last presentation, you were introduced to the principle of autonomy. We looked at both its negative implications, which are primary, and that is the idea that because of the principle of autonomy, we should not coerce or manipulate others, or recognizing that all our principles are prima facie, that coercion and manipulation are seriously morally problematic and always require moral justification. We also looked at the positive implications of the principle of autonomy in professional contexts, where there is a positive duty to cooperate with our clients' or patients' autonomous choices, and in the healthcare context, a positive obligation to intervene in ways that maintain or restore our patients' capacity for autonomy and therefore their capacity to participate in decision making. This time we want to look at the basis for these profound moral claims. At the beginning of the first presentation, I made a point that we use autonomy in two distinct ways. One, to refer simply to the human capacity for autonomy, but also to refer to autonomy as a moral principle. When we think about the basis for the moral principle of autonomy and for our beliefs about the wrongness of coercion and manipulation, I think it's important to begin by referring back to that capacity for autonomy. The idea is that we clearly have a capacity to think, choose, value, and act for ourselves independently. We are surely influenced by culture. We are influenced by our parents. We are influenced by the things that other people say to us, the ways in which we are shaped by other people. But we have a capacity to distance ourselves from all that, to step back from it, and to think, choose, value, and act for ourselves as individuals, independently. That's what we're talking about when we talk about this capacity for autonomy. Now, that leads to our moral convictions about coercion and manipulation and cooperation with others' choices, because we believe somehow that this capacity for autonomy is an essential defining component of what it means to be a human being. If morality has something to do with respecting each other as human beings, surely it has to do with respecting our capacity as individuals for autonomy. If that capacity is not respected, we are surely not respected as human beings. One of the important things we notice about ourselves as human beings is that we have an ability or a capacity for self-consciousness or self-reflection. Think about what that means. We each have a capacity to make ourselves the object of our own thought or our own reflection. We can talk to ourselves. We can say, why did I do that? We are able to distance ourselves from ourselves and notice who we are and what we do. We can ask ourselves, why did you do that? Etc. It is that capacity for self-reflection, or this ability to be self-reflective or self-conscious, which makes critical thinking possible. Remember when we talked about critical thinking, I said it's being aware of multiple perspectives, but it also involves thinking about our own perspective, stepping out of ourselves, and thinking carefully about what we do, what we believe, who we are, etc. That's a part of critical thinking. Some philosophers have said that this capacity for self-consciousness or self-reflection is what makes us moral creatures. Now, we don't mean by that this is what makes it so that we do the right thing and don't do the wrong thing. Rather, it's simply what makes the ideas of right and wrong, the idea that we ought to do something or ought not to do something, make sense. If we had no capacity to critically reflect on our own selves and on our own actions, if we had no ability to think, choose, value, and act for ourselves, it would make no sense to think about, to talk about right or wrong behavior. If we did not have a capacity to change our behavior based upon self-reflection, we would simply, more like animals, respond only to stimuli, and moral judgments would make no sense. This capacity for self-consciousness or self-reflection is the basis for memory. Stepping back from ourselves, we can think back to what has happened to us in the past. And we can project ourselves into the future. We can imagine different possibilities for ourselves and choose some or hope for some over others. And all of this is what enables us to ask questions of meaning and to try to find meaning in our lives. It's what enables us to tell stories, write poetry, make art, all of which are attempts on our part to define or discover or instill meaning in our lives. We notice this capacity for self-reflection and all of its implications, but it leads to our moral commitments identified by the principle of autonomy because of our conviction that somehow this capacity that we have for self-reflection, for autonomy, is essential to our humanity. It certainly is a capacity that seems to distinguish us from other animals. Now, some of the higher animals certainly have the beginnings of a capacity for autonomy, but none like us are capable of making ourselves the object of our own reflection, giving meaning to our lives, producing stories and history and art. No animal probably is capable of thinking about what they ought or ought not to do. No other animal is a moral creature. This surely distinguishes us from the other animals. And I think we also experience the realization that when we are not allowed to exercise this capacity for self-determination, we feel disrespected, humiliated, or violated even. Surely when we are beaten or attacked or injured, we see that as a violation of who we are as human beings. But simply to be coerced or manipulated, simply to have others not acknowledge and allow us to exercise our capacity for thinking, choosing, valuing, and acting for ourselves, that is perceived by us as a profound disrespect, humiliation, violation. Let me refer to a phrase from the philosopher Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant said we should never treat others or be treated merely as a means to another person's ends or goals. To be treated that way is for us to be treated like an animal or like an object, but not as a human being. To respect others as human beings, to be respected as a human being, means that others respect our own values, our own goals, our own desires, our own sense of meaning, rather than simply using us as a means to their own ends. All of this is the basis for our commitment to the principle of autonomy, the idea that we ought not coerce, we ought not manipulate, we ought, in professional contexts, to cooperate with other people's autonomous choices.